Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and we're going to take a look at a game that was played yesterday, at least as of this recording, in the European Club Cup. White was Dmitry Yakovenko, who at one time I think made it to number 5 in the world, maybe number 6. Still very strong, he's over 2,700 at the moment. And Boris Gelfand had black. So it's a very interesting game, and in particular the rook ending that arises I think is really fascinating and instructive. The first part of the game is kind of fascinating in a different way, in that the first 36 moves of this game followed an earlier game. So there were 36 moves for free, and then they started playing chess from there. So I'll go fairly quickly through the first part of the game and spend a bit more time on the rook ending. Alright, so Yakovenko had white, and by transposition we go into a Queen's Gambit declined, and it's the Lasker variation, the point of which, at least classically, is to swap off a couple of minor pieces, so that way black's position is a bit less cramped. And then once these exchanges have taken place, black will figure out what to do to get this bishop on c8 into the game. Alright, so all of this has been seen thousands of times, certainly hundreds, most likely thousands of times over the years. Okay, and now here we have a new-ish position. It's not that new, but generally black has played c5 here. So this is kind of the classic move, but knight to f6 is a really nice move that was developed, I think, by the Anand team for the match with Topalov. So I don't know if Kazimzhanov invented it, Anand invented it, who did, but I'm sure it was developed then, and it was first actually played by Kazimzhanov, who was one of Anand's seconds in that match. So he played this against Luke Van Wely in the Olympiad last year in 2010 in Khanty-Mansiysk, and that game was a routine draw. This line was repeated in the Radjabov-Kramnik game from the candidates match, or one of the Radjabov-Kramnik games from the candidates match earlier this year in Kazan, and then of course again it's played for the third time in our game today. Interestingly, in none of the three games is there any variation. So they played all the same moves, and it's just the games dropped off sooner. Well, okay, actually that's not quite true, because you have some meaningless repetitions in this game, so I guess in some sense, trivially speaking, there are some earlier novelties. But basically, the three games all go the same way. The first two games, the players agreed to a draw, and this game went longer. Alright, so let's see what happens. White plays rook takes c6, and alright, the one thing we can say about this is that black has solved the problem of his light squared bishop by simply jettisoning his c-pawn. But if it's just a pawn for nothing, that's not really so good. So let's see what black has in mind. So the first move is knight to d5, clearly threatening to play knight to b4. Notice that if white plays a3, there is a second nasty point to this knight to d5 move. So let's give this an exclam, which is that after bishop to d7, the white rook is trapped. It can go to c4, but then bishop to b5, and there's nowhere to go. Black wins the exchange and will have some advantage. So white plays queen to b3. This is what happened in all the games. So it gets out of the fork, and of course gives the rook the c1 square to run off to. So knight to b4, rook c1, takes, bishop to b7. And now white has to make a decision. What is he going to do about the threat of bishop takes f3? Or at least the threat of bishop takes f3 should he decide to castle. Now, you might say, well, why not a move like e4? Well, the thing about e4, I suppose, is the queen to b4 check can be played. Although, maybe queen to d2 is an adequate reply, since queen takes d2, knight takes d2 protects the e4 pawn. But I think on this, if nothing else, maybe black can play queen to b5, preventing castling, renewing the threat on the e-pawn, and if white plays queen to e2 or queen to e3, black just checks. Well, if queen to e2, black can just trade queens and take on e4, and if queen e3, there's queen takes b2. e5 is positionally really suspect, and in fact, black will regain his pawn there anyway, I think, with bishop takes f3 and then queen to d5. So this looks sufficient. Also, and similarly, if queen to e2, then black has a couple of good follow-ups. One is queen to b4 check. Again, if queen to d2, queen to b5. preventing castling. And if white plays queen e2, just go back and check again. Or you could even play queen a5 check and then take on a2. Another idea for black here is to play a5, and still this is still another way of harassing the white rook. So if white castles, bishop to a6, and you've got the skewer here. So this guy comes here, and bishop a6 picks up the exchange. So all three players chose to castle here, and now black takes, plays queen g5 check. And you might think that this is weakening white's king side, but in fact, while it does allow black to regain a pawn, and the white king side is of course a little bit more open, the longer term problems are probably black's with the g file. So white plays king h1, and then the rook can come to g1, and the black king has to be a little bit careful. Now, the first game, so the Van Wely-Kazimjanov game, was agreed to a draw here, but Radjabov and, of course, in our game, Yakovenko continued. So queen to d5, this was the big idea, regaining the pawn. Queen e4, queen a2, rook to g1. Now, at this point, black could take on b2, maybe. I didn't find a forced win against it, but it's extremely dangerous, and certainly not advisable, since the best that black can hope for there is a draw anyway. So queen e5, g6, and now queen f6. And the threat is to take on g6. So I'll put in a sample line. So if rook takes g6, f g6, queen g6, king h8, and then rook to c7 is winning. Black has to give up his queen with queen to b1 check or queen to c1 check to stop the mate. So this, of course, is game ending. And perhaps, white can even play queen h6. This can't be bad either. Maybe this is even better. Here, rook g7. Yeah. So better just to give mate and to do it with all checks. All right, so that's the threat. The best way to deal with it is with rook f to c8. So this gives the king room to run towards the queen side, and it also obviously stops rook to c7 business. So from here, rook takes g6, f g6, and now white has three moves that he can try. None of them seem to lead to a clear win, but maybe in one of the cases white has some edge. Alright, a definite non-winner is rook to g1 because of rook to c1. So this simply forces the rooks off the board, and white is not going to be able to pick up the black rook. At least I don't think he can. And maybe in some line where he can, there'll still be an immediate perpetual. Anyway, you'll get a better idea for the kinds of possibilities that black has in a moment. So a second plan is to play queen takes g6 check, king f8, queen f6, king e8, queen takes e6, king d8. And obviously white has perpetual, but does he have more? I don't see it. One try is rook to g1. And on this, black can force a draw like this. Rook to c1, queen d5, king c7, queen a8. And for a moment it might look as if this is just great for white, but his king doesn't quite have enough room to escape the perpetual. So takes, queen to b1 check, king g2, and queen to g6 check, and there's a perpetual. Now, notice that of course if black had a pawn on g6, there would be no perpetual. There wouldn't even be a good check here. So, going back to this point, instead of queen g6, how about queen takes e6 check? King g7, queen d7. Now, if, king f6, rook c6, takes, and here black has a choice. If he goes to g7, then queen a8, queen f2, queen a7 check, and white has some chances here. Of course, he's got to worry about mate, but that can be defended easily enough. So white at least has some small prospects here. Probably black's best is king to g5. And now we have a really crazy line. f4 check, king h4, and now not taking the rook. If he does take the rook, then queen takes f2, and white is in trouble. So he's got to play king to g2. But this is also a very strong move, because not only does he protect the f2 pawn and get out of the way of checks, but he of course also threatens the rook. But the real point is queen f3 followed by queen to h3 mate. That's the big deal here. So black has to find queen to e2, and this is a very good move. And now it threatens to give perpetual with queen g4, queen d1. And of course it stops queen f3. So what does white do? h3. That stops the perpetual, and it keeps the black king in its little box here. So now white would like to, of course, not only take the rook, but play queen takes g6, threatening queen takes h6 check, queen h5, and then queen f6 check, followed by queen takes g5 mate. So black should play rook to g8. And now queen to e6. If the rook goes to g7, queen f6 check wins the rook. If the rook leaves, then there's queen takes g6 again with the threat that I mentioned before. So what does black do here? The answer? Very nice move. Queen h5. Okay, well, what's the point of this funny move? Queen takes g8, and now queen f5. And now we see the point of this funny move. So he threatens to play queen h3 check, followed by queen g4 with perpetual. And maybe in some case he could even have more, depending on where the white queen is. So looks like white's best now is queen to b3. So that covers d1. So there's no queen g4 d1 perpetual to worry about. So black takes the pawn, white goes back, and it looks like maybe white's a little bit better here. Material equality has been reestablished after all of that. The main difference is that the white pawns are a little further advanced, and for that reason he may have a little lead in the race, but it's far from a clear advantage at this point. So this would have been possible. What is clear is that in all of these lines, black is groveling for a draw. So if black is not getting any chances with queen takes b2, it's better not to do that. Therefore, Kramnik and in our game Gelfand played rook f to c8, getting again creating that flight square in advance and preventing the white rook from c1 from activating. Alright, queen to b7, threatening the rook. Of course, rook takes c1 is a blunder because queen a8 is check. So rook f8. And now, well, the white queen has nothing to do on b7, so, or at least it doesn't seem to, so he goes back to e4, and they repeat. And now, okay, rook to c7. And this happened in the Rajabov-Kramnik game without the repetition. So we've got the same position here. Queen b2, rook f7, that was the idea. Takes. And now another repetition thrown in by Yakovenko with queen a8 again. Note, by the way, that if queen takes e6, queen f2 is perfectly good for black. So we have this. By the way, I should say, it's kind of funny that Yakovenko throws in these double repetitions. I mean, I think they're playing with two time controls, but maybe they weren't. Maybe it was just the one time control. But even so, I mean, it's still kind of funny that he's prepared the game up to basically move 37 is where he makes his novelty, and he's still doing these things to gain time on the clock. So it's kind of amusing. Rook c7, queen g6, king h8, queen e8. Okay, and so finally we have this, and then check, and then all right, here we finally have the point of departure. So queen e8 check and draw agreed was the story in the Rajabov-Kramnik game. The only difference was that was on move 33 that this was played. So instead it's move 37 in our game, and Yakovenko plays h3. This is the new move. All right, what's the point of this? Well, the main point is that it avoids some perpetuals. So the king, let's say the rook goes up somewhere. Well, okay, let me not. I'll show you in a couple of moves where this will come into play. So first of all, let's ask what black to move should do. One move that, of course, black would love to play is rook to c2, but this is just a terrible blunder because queen e8 check, queen g6 check, and then queen takes g7 is checkmate. Another move that has its appeal but is probably not best is rook to f7. So now queen to e8 check, rook f8, queen e6 check, rook f7, and f4. And here we see what I was referring to with the perpetual. So if the pawn was back on h2, black could just play queen f3 check, rook g2, queen f1 check, and so on with the perpet. Here, there's no perpetual, as we'll see. a5, d5, b5, d6, queen f3, king h2. All right, and now let's say that, just a second. Okay, yeah, let's say that black tries to pin white here with queen to c6. Oops, with queen to c6. Now rook to g2 is a very nice move. So this prepares f5, and of course this would hang immediately. So if you play f5 right away, then there's queen c2 check, and queen takes f5. So that's the big point with rook to g2. All right, so just a second. All right, so queen c6, rook to g2, and now, for instance, a4, f5. The white pawns are faster, and I think black might be in some trouble. So it's I'm not sure that this is so good. Rook to f7. Gelfand played queen to c2, and I think this is the right move. So it challenges the queen, it takes away some of these key light squares, and it aims to put the to maneuver the queen to a new good square like f5. All right, queen to e8 check, king h7, d5, and there's queen f5, threatening queen takes h3 mate, as well as queen takes f3. So Yakovenko played queen to e4, and this forces a rook ending, and it's one that, as I said, is really quite interesting. It's a fascinating ending. And part of what's fascinating about it is that there's a kind of a battle. I mean, often the traditional rules of thumb apply, but there are a couple of lines where, by following the kind of general rules of thumb that you should in most rook endings, one side or the other will get into trouble, or at least not achieve what they ought to. All right, well, here a question for you. Should black play g6 or queen takes e4? Or I guess you could consider rook to f7 as well, although the fact that I kind of threw that in as an afterthought will probably tell you that that's not one of the two main moves. Well, I think that g6 might be the best move here. And the point is that after queen f5, gf5, let's say e4, fe4, fe4, both sides have gained and lost from this. From black's point of view, the gain is that white now only has two passed pawns in the center. Okay, not three. Even though in the game the three passed pawns include doubled e pawns, we'll see that that is not exactly meaningless, that those pawns are in fact quite valuable for white. So black has gained a little something out of that. On the other hand, now the black king is cut off, and that looks like it could be trouble. But the funny thing is that there's no way for white to really exploit the black king's being cut off, at least not if he wants to activate his own king. So activating his own king will involve some concessions. If he plays king to g2, black plays king g6, and then his king is right in the action. If he plays something like rook to g3, okay, after rook to d7, if he plays rook to g3, then he's going to have to lose some time. So king g2, a4, and now the rook on g3 is not well placed. King f3. Okay, actually, first let's look at rook to d3. So this prepares to get his own pawns going, but again, then there was no real point to rook to g3. Black activates his king. And from here, we'll look at two moves. We'll look at e5 and king f3. So if king f3, now not king f6 because king f4 and e5 comes with tempo, but king f7, e5. And here's actually a good question, or a good place to try to figure out what black should do. So how should black respond to the threat of e6 check? The answer, I think, is that he should follow the rule of thumb that passed pawns must be pushed, or at least they should be helped. Rook a7, rook a3, b5, king e4, b4, e6 check, king e7, and now after rook f3, king d6. So very nice move, stopping rook to f7 and really preventing white from advancing this whole block together. I mean, if the rook weren't hanging, or if the rook were already on f3, if it's white's move here, king e5 would be great, but king d6 thwarts this. And here black can play a2. Just sacrifice the rook, it doesn't matter. And black has some winning chances here in this position. It's important, of course, that e7 fails to queen to b4 check, and then queen takes e7. So king to f3, I think black is doing great. If e5, king f5, e6, and again it's important that black is just in time. Rook to g7 check, king f3 and king e5. So if d6, king takes e6. Rook e3 check, king d6, king e4, and again Rook a7, helping the pawn to go. Rook c3, a3, check. King f5, a2, d6, king d8, e7 check, king d7, rook c7 check, takes, a1 queen, and this is a draw. So white's got an immediate perpetual. Not that he needs it. I mean, he can just play queen c7 and queen takes b6. So it's a dead draw one way or another. All right. So rook to d3 is not bad, but not winning. Another try is king to f3, just activating his king and ignoring the a-pawn, but that pawn's fast. And now black's king still comes into the game in time to prevent white from really getting everything he wants. So white has nothing better now than to just get rid of the black passer on a2, but clearly it's black who has the better half of the draw here. So g6 I think is actually quite good. So this is the key position here, and after rook to d7 it doesn't seem to me that white has anything really special here. So Gelfand played queen takes e4, and even though it gives white double pawns, black has a 2-on-1 kingside majority and can easily get his king back over to the kingside, this may not be as good. Alright, f takes e4, and now this is an absolutely crucial moment of the game. I think at this point Gelfand actually loses the game, although it's I'm not mathematically certain about that, but as far as I can tell with my analysis, this is the losing move, and it's really quite a natural move too. So try to work it out on your own. Alright, the move that Gelfand played here is king to g8. And this, again, makes very good sense. He's bringing the king into the action. He's going to use it to help defend. He's keeping his rook on what looks like an active square, but it just doesn't work out. The right way is rook to e7. And it's a funny looking move because after d6, black can't take. I mean, if he plays rook e4, then there's d7. But after rook to e8, the black rook is perfectly placed. And the key is that white's pawns are not well placed. They don't function well together. Ideally what white wants, alright, just going back to this position, white wants to have this pawn duo side by side, because then the pawns can't be blockaded. You can't stick a king on d6 or on e5. It's not going to get there. So the pawns then are always threatening to advance. The rook can't blockade them, the king can't blockade them. They become very difficult to deal with. So that's why it's really important for black to force them to kind of be, well, for them not to be adjacent, for them to be, protecting each other on a kind of a staircase rather than side by side. Note that white could play rook to g4, but still that doesn't get the pawns adjacent, and the rook is badly placed there. Then black will start running his pawns. So d6, rook e8, and now let's look at some possibilities for white. If e5, now black can't take. Rook d1, rook e8, e4, king g6, e5, king f5. Black is there just in time, and it's enough. And in fact, here black is a little bit better. Another unsuccessful white attempt is rook to d1. So preparing e5, but again, black gets there just in time. Finally, white could try rook to a1, attempting to get his rook into the game. And the point is that after a5, rook to b1, now, okay, again, rook takes e4 is impossible because of d7, same as always. And if rook to b8, then e5, king g6, e6, and the pawns get there. The pawns are there first. So that would be a real problem for black. Or even e5, king g6, rook to f1. So what does black do here? The answer, once again, passed pawns must be pushed. a4. Rook takes b6, rook a8. And now black is able to save the game. d7, a3. Now notice that rook to a6 would be a blunder, because after rook takes a6, d8 queen, a2, and white can't stop the pawn. He's got no checks. He can't bother the rook. And a1 is going to be queen with check. So this is winning for black. So that little trick doesn't work. So he's got to go back to b1, rook to d8, Okay, you could play rook to d1, you could play rook to a1, doesn't really matter. And, well, actually, maybe it does. I take that back. Perhaps rook to a1 is a touch more accurate. So rook d7, rook a3, and at least now there's no rook to d3, but here rook to d2 is equalizing, if nothing else. So anyway, this version, there's no rook to d2, but rook to d3 is quite strong. Rook to e2 is forced, at least if white is going to pretend to have any advantage, but now king g6, and the king goes to e5, and it's a dead draw. So, rook to e7 here. I mean, this is an easy move not to find. Okay, now I'm sure everyone knows it. You know, I'm sure if Gelfand gets this position again, he'll play rook to e7 or g6, the move before. And so now white will have to find some novelty on move 50, or more likely earlier. But in the game, Gelfand played the natural king to g8, and I think he's lost now. e5, king f7. And here, white has, I think, more than one way to win. So I think the most effective way for white to go is to activate his king, surprisingly enough. So the king, you know, looks like activating the king would just take forever, but it's quite efficient. King g2, a5, king f3. All right, now, if the a pawn keeps going, we'll see what happens. King e4, a3, check, king e8. Of course, you can't go to e7 because of d6 check. So king e8, d6. Now, if rook to d7, king d5 followed by e6 is hopeless. And on rook f7, rook to c1, rook a7, and e6, and it's all over from here. So a4 is not going to work. Another idea is to play rook c4, trying to keep the king cut off. But now the pawns are able to make progress. e6 check, king f6, and now rook to d1. And here the rook needs to scurry back, because the threat is to play d6, and on king e6 play d7. So the rook's got to go back, and now the king comes up. King e7, king e5. Okay, if you play rook c5 to pin the pawn, then rook f1, followed by rook f7 check and king d6. So rook c3 is another idea, but now check, and simply rook f1, and white wins. So activating the king is very powerful. You can see that the black queenside pawns really don't get that far. I mean, in the one line, it made it to a3, but it was still just way too late. So a2, rook c8 is mate. If the rook goes back to a2, then I think, let's see, what do we do here? Let's work this line out to the end. d7 check. Okay, if king e7, rook c8 wins. And if king to d8, can we play king d5? Yeah, king d5, a2, king d6. So that'll do the job. a1 queen, e7 mate. Maybe there's something even better, but that certainly looks good enough. Alright, so king g2 I think would have been Yakovenko's best, but rook to f1 check also worked out alright. King e8, okay, again he could play king g2, but he plays e6. King e7. And this really had to be calculated very accurately for white. So e4, king d6, because it looks at first like he's got some kind of blockade. White can break it, but it's work. Now, here I think king g2 again is a winning move, but I'll skip this line and just show the game. Rook f8, rook to b7, rook to d8 check, king e7, rook c8, king d6. Not b5. This would be bad. e5, and then rook to g8. So this is what white's trying to set up with all of these checks. So that's why king d6 is important to play. And now here, it looks as if white might even be in trouble, or at least that he maybe has to take this perpetual with rook to d8 and then moving the rook away again. So figure out how white's move can win in this position. And actually, okay, yeah, so work on that for a bit. I mean, the rest of the game is just very beautifully calculated. Maybe it was even part of the home prep, I don't know, but definitely was a very, very nice, very deeply calculated conclusion. All right, the right move here is not rook to c6 check. Now, if king to e7, then it works like a dream. e5, b5, rook c8, b4, rook to g8, and white wins very easily. But after rook to c6 check, there's king to e5. And now, I don't know if white is losing, but black is certainly not hurting at this point. So, what else can white do? I mean, if he plays passively, the b and a pawns are going to run. Well, the answer is to bring the king into the game. King g2, b5, king f3, b4, king f4, b3. So here we go. Rook c6 check, king e7. All right, now, white doesn't have time for that e5 idea, though. I mean, if e5, b2, and I mean, unless you can magically put the rook on g7 right now, it's lost. Rook c8, b1 queen, and it's not even close. But then what's the point? Well, king e5, but this looks like it's got to be too slow as well, doesn't it? Well, it's not. All right, if rook to b5 to stop d6 check, then rook c7 check, king d8, e7 check, and wins. If king takes c7, obviously e8 queen. If king e8, then king e6. Threatening mate, rook to b8, d6, and we mate like so. All right, but instead of this, b2. This is the game. And again, it looks at first glance like white is just too slow. But he's not. d6 check. Okay, king d8 is forced, otherwise rook to c8 is mate. e7 check. Now, rook takes e7 check is almost good enough, but takes. And while the rook has no way to stop the b pawn right now, there's rook to c7 check first, and then rook to b7, and white wins. Black has to play king d7, and now the culminating blow, rook to c8. And if black queens, then e8 is queen and checkmate at the same time. So, black plays rook to b5 check. Okay, and here, what should white do? So the need for accuracy is not ended yet, believe it or not. What should white do? If you said king to f4, shielding the king from horizontal checks, you are absolutely wrong. Because black has g5 check, and after the king moves wherever, rook to e5, and now black is great. Black is doing just fine. e8 queen, you just take it. If rook to d8 check, king c6, queen, takes, and you've got your own queen. So life is good now for black. So white plays king to d4. This is right. All right, new question. Rook to b4 check. What do you do from here? How does white make progress at this point? Well, if you said king to e3, then you've lost the game because rook takes e4 is check, and if white doesn't take the rook, then the rook's got it covered, and if he does, b1 is queen with check. So please don't play king to e3 here. If you go to c5, well, black plays rook to b5 check, and at best this is a repetition. You go back to d4 and try again. If you take the rook, of course, b1 queen and you lose. Similarly, I think, is king to d5, rook to b5 check, king c4, and then you could maybe play rook to e5, maybe you can play rook to b4 check as well. So this is not really the answer to all of life's little problems either. The right move is king to c3. And the reason is that now if black plays rook takes e4, you throw in this check, and then you can play king takes b2. So that's why you need the king over there. And now white's going to win the rook for the two pawns, and in the resulting endgame, black's not going to have a chance. So finally, Gelfand accepted the inevitable, played king takes c8, and from here white wins. Okay, you could play d7 as well. This is probably the most efficient win, but what Yakovenko did was fine. Queen d7 check, queen c8 check. All right, if king a5, then queen c5, followed by queen takes b4. Rook to b7 was Gelfand's try. Queen c4 check. Okay, now if king to a5, queen a2 check, followed by queen takes b2 check, and that's all over. So rook to b5, queen a2 check, king to b6, and now the winning move, d7, and Gelfand resigned. So if black queens, of course, then white just takes it and makes a new queen and wins. And if black plays king to c7, then queen to c4 check finishes the job. So a very nice bit of, I don't know how much of it is preparation, but it was a very good game, a very nice rook ending by Yakovenko. If he prepared this whole rook ending at home, then great preparation. If not, very nice job over the board. But at any rate, I think it's a very instructive ending. I mean, we see a lot of themes at play here. Activating the king, sometimes not activating the king, what looks like a good formation, good pawn formation, what's not. You know, the pawns on d5 and e5, when that formation was achieved, that almost always meant that white was just going to win. You know, we see, you know, sometimes you go active, sometimes you sacrifice. We see mating ideas. So really a very instructive ending, and you know, a lot of tactics involved in it too. But the tactics very often went hand in glove with the thematic elements too. So I hope you enjoyed this. And before we go, let me remind people to check out my blog. That's at thechessmind.net. So have a look there. And those of you who are interested in taking lessons, I offer them. So you can contact me through my blog, through the contact link there, or through the chessvideos.tv server. Anyway, have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.